So it is my great privilege to introduce Dr. Bennett Shapiro, the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, to accept the Rockefeller Foundation's Next Century Innovators Award.
We're delighted to accept this award for the Neglected Disease Initiative, an initiative that we think considers research into useful medicines for all people. Of course, is that without economic incentive, there were no that would never affect anyone in this room. Yet, people who by the accident of birth geography ended up are subject to communicable diseases that many of you never heard of, and for which no one tried to find any treatment. And so the treatments that they endured were drugs that were out of our pharmacopoeia 100 years ago. The treatment for sleeping sickness was an organic arsenic, 5% of the people who got it. So that a physician who would work in Africa, in the parts of Africa that had sleeping sickness, would have to give this drug and explain to the patient that these are going to be multiple painful injections from a disease that you're going to die of if you don't get any treatment. But this treatment might in fact not only hurt you for day after day, but might kill you. And the patient would naturally ask, why do I have to take a treatment that is so bad? And so, in frustration, Doctors Without Borders, MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, who, with treating patients like this, with horrible, outdated methods, in frustration, came to an unusual decision, a rather audacious decision. These people who were so care on the ground decided to start a drug discovery enterprise. And I got involved in this when I was at Merck running a worldwide drug discovery at Merck, and I met with people from MSF who I'd always admired enormously as an organization. They told me this idea, which just seemed incredible. Drug discovery is really hard, and the failure rate is very high. And so the idea that these doctors would put together something like this just seemed very, very audacious. On the other hand, they knew that they didn't have the expertise to deal with this, and that no to actually face this problem. No one group. And so, but they did understand that the disease was very well understood as a process, and the patients were understood by the endemic countries suffering with these diseases. And so, of course, endemic countries have usually the governments of establishments in Kenya, Brazil, and India took part in this structure to reflect several domains where these diseases like occur. The knowledge of the patients existed there, the knowledge of drug discovery existed within the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, so they would have to come to the table as well and open up their coffers of molecular entities that might be helpful in this regard. And then support was obtained from national governments, European national governments, philanthropies, who saw that this really had to be a public-private partnership to be successful, that no one entity could ever make this work. And so we started 10 years ago with this, and we've come up with 6 new products. These, as you can imagine, if you think about the complexity of drug discovery, most of these were either repurposed other drugs or combination drugs that met a need that existed for outdated drugs. So for example, in sleeping sickness, which was the central therapy, by a modified injection protocol that now 96% of people with sleeping sickness get. And it's on the essential medicine list of the countries affected by sleeping sickness. We also tested our ability to do this with the kind of drug we'd like to have for every indication. The World Health Organization has suggested that artemisium compounds, natural products, lead to resistance in a short time, and this breakthrough medicine would be made useless. And so they recommended combination therapy. No one else was doing that. We were just getting started, and we thought, well, gee, let's see if we can actually make a combination therapy, do the clinical trials, get this accepted in countries. And in fact, we came up with a malarial drug for Africa that has now been delivered in over 200 million doses. It costs 50 cents for a child for therapy, and $1 for an adult, and it's a 3-day therapy. And that's the kind of drug we would like for Chagas disease, and we're working also on pediatric AIDS, which is another set of neglected patients in these neglected populations. So we have a full pipeline of drugs that look like they could provide rational therapy, i.e. oral therapy. It doesn't take much to imagine the areas where these diseases occur and how they can be quite remote. And so we need simplified therapy that can be administered by healthcare personnel everywhere. To achieve this status, this couldn't be done by one entity, as I said earlier. And in fact, we had to innovate new structures. We had to work out new intellectual property structures that allowed the pharmaceutical companies to enthusiastically participate in such an endeavor. We had to work out clinical trial facilities in the endemic areas with the countries involved to be able to do good clinical practice so that the same standards for quality, for safety and efficacy would exist for neglected patients as exist for Americans and Europeans when they get serious diseases. We had to work out structures that would allow good regulatory activities with the wisdom of the endemic countries and their knowledge of disease, people, and ethical issues, with expertise from European Medicines Association, the FDA, and others. So this is a true partnership. It exists with some 110 people in DNDi, but some 600 people, 700 people total worldwide who are committed and working on this project. It's a model for drug discovery that has open innovation, which we have found cut the costs of drug discovery enormously. And by removing these barriers and by cooperation, we really have an opportunity to change the way medicines are delivered for all people, but certainly for these neglected people, because our idea is to provide the best science for the most neglected people in the world. That's what DNDi is about. It has been oriented with a patient-first philosophy, and that's why we tried modifying these horrible drugs before we got into the standard drug discovery pipeline to make the perfect drug. And so on behalf of everyone involved who is working on this and the millions of patients who have benefited from this, I want to thank the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you, Dr. Rodin, and your colleagues. These have been very important years for us, our first decade and it was interesting to hear at the beginning that the Rockefeller Foundation in its first decade was also working on global infectious disease. And so we're delighted to join on a path that's been carved out by the Rockefeller Foundation. We came 90 years later, and we hope to continue in this journey together. Thank you so much.